Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Daily Friends Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, joined today by Mr. Tiego Thotse. Tiego, you were ill last week, but we're very glad to have you back. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's really great to be back. Good afternoon, Chris. Afternoon to the viewers as well.
Indeed. And we're also joined by Mr. Chris Hattingh. Chris, how are you?
Gentlemen, doing well, thanks. Trying to survive the sweltering warm embrace of Johannesburg this week.
Indeed. But that being said, according to my weather app, which routinely lies, so take it with a pinch of salt, the rainy season is on its way, and hopefully things will get a bit more manageable and tolerable within the next week. With that being said, let us talk about water. Water in Gauteng, water in Johannesburg, which has been a major problem over the last couple of months. So I know the most about Joburg, but I believe there have also been other water problems across Gauteng. But there's been major problems filling some of the reservoirs around Johannesburg due to problems with Rand Water not being able to supply enough water to these reservoirs. They keep emptying. Rand Water has now said that Gauteng is using 5,000 megaliters of water per day, which they say is an unsustainable demand, and that is why they are tightening taps for the last 10 days. Their spokesperson said, leakage or wastage of water has added to the high consumption. Dam levels are not the issue. The dams are almost full. We even increased the capacity of water supply to Gauteng, but this has not helped. A week ago, Rand Water throttled its supply by 30% in order to get its reservoirs back to stable levels of 60% because they were down below 40%. Joburg Water purchases the water from Rand Water and then actually sends it to the homes. Rand Water was also saying that Joburg is unusually high in the amount of water that is being wasted due to things like leakages from the pipe system. However, I'm a little bit suspicious of that because, as they themselves point out, nationally, 38% of all the country's potable water is lost through leaks. In Joburg, this number is only 40%, so it's not really that much higher than it is in the rest of the country. Now, I know that there has been major problems with communication as to what exactly some of the problems here are, and at least some of them have been to do with the fact that I think that Rand Water's infrastructure has not been working correctly. I think they had like a pumping house breakdown and stuff, and various other problems like that. But really the point I wanted to make on this issue, and Tiego, I think we'll start with you to get your thoughts on this. This sounds an awful lot to me like how Eskom initially responded to load shedding. You remember way back, when you and I were but young lads who weren't anywhere close to being adults yet, load shedding was beginning. And Eskom put out all those messages saying, no, the real problem is you're all using too much electricity and you need to reduce your usage. And there would be those things that would come on TV on like SABC and stuff or ETV at 5 a.m. It would say, grid usage is high, please reduce usage. And initially, Eskom blamed the public, basically saying it's your fault for using too much electricity. However, it became very apparent quite quickly that even as South Africans reduced the amount of electricity they used, and South Africans have reduced the amount of electricity they've used over the last decade, Eskom got worse and worse and just wasn't able to keep up because the real problem was their infrastructure, their planning, and their maintenance. Am I right about that, Tiego? What's your thoughts on the story?
Well, I think you are absolutely correct. I think it's precisely what's happening in this instance. I think the only difference would be that at least these ones, to a certain extent, are honest to say that there is a leakage problem. But of course, what causes the leakage problem that's causing for 40% of that water to be lost along the way is the fact that they are not maintained, infrastructure is not being maintained properly. Right, things are not being done in that way. That would be really the only difference between what Eskom did at the time and what they are doing now. At least they're a bit honest that part of what causes this crisis is their incompetence, them not being able to maintain infrastructure that they should be maintaining. This is, of course, between Joburg municipality, between Rand Water, Joburg Water, all of them taking care of sections of water infrastructure that they should take care of. So at least there's a bit of acknowledgement here that it's 40% of the crisis is our own making due to failing to maintain infrastructure properly.
So I think in South Africa, we're really, Chris, beginning to have to ask the question, what is the alternative to government-supplied water systems? We've had major problems in the Western Cape where they narrowly avoided the so-called day zero in terms of running out of water in the city of Cape Town. And now we're beginning to see very big problems up here in Gauteng. We've seen problems in the Eastern Cape. I know that Port Elizabeth or Gqeberha has had major problems with its water supply. What is it that ordinary citizens do you think can do in the meantime to shield themselves against some of these problems? And can we actually have anything like a functioning kind of middle class society and economy if there isn't any water? You can kind of get by without electricity, get a generator and stuff like that, and a lot of businesses have not done that. But how do you deal with not having water?
No, we should take advice from the latest mayor in Johannesburg and all install JoJo tanks. Wasn't that part of his first batch of policy proposals? So the state asking us to state-proof ourselves, maybe it's not even irony at this point, but it's simply the harsh reality on the ground. I mean, in a lot of our CRA briefings to our clients, to corporates, and businesses of all sizes, it's this question of how do we go moving forward? I think it might be a sort of community or business by business case, taking it by context, what you can handle in terms of your budget, what you can't, where you can pull resources, where you can't, maybe as a street or a suburb or even just a residents association, a complex association, those sorts of plans, looking for boreholes as alternative sources of water, where can water be stored to have readily available when inevitably municipal supply fails, because maybe we've been too focused on rolling blackouts up until this point and we've lost sight of what's going to happen with water, I think, because just as with electricity, basic maintenance not being done, upgrading of the power fleet, the stations, the same work hasn't been done with water infrastructure. So you'll have natural disasters. You might very well have very high usage compared to previous years. That could definitely exacerbate things, but it exposes the underlying issues, the underlying work which hasn't been done to make sure that we've got the supply.
Randwater did say the heat wave was making the situation worse.
Yeah, natural disasters, I think, serve quite well to expose poor government policy, poor government ideology, poor government planning.
And of course, the people who are really going to struggle to make a plan here are very poor people. If you're quite poor, you can still go to a certain place, maybe get your phone charged. If you don't have electricity, maybe someone in the neighborhood has a generator. People can kind of get by. It's not great. But when the water runs out, and if the government doesn't provide water tankers, you really are in trouble. Tiego, final thoughts on this one?
Well, absolutely correct. I stayed in Grahamstown in the Eastern Cape for the past 5 or so years.
I remember they ran out of water.
Yeah, there was no water there. Since around 2015 to when I left in end of 2019, then went back again last year. Every second day you'd be without water. It's a norm of the day. It's standard. You know that today if you have water, then certainly you don't have water tomorrow. But particularly in township, the situation was quite worse because they could go out of water for about 2 weeks or so, even when we do have water after every second day. So I think you are absolutely correct, spot on, that such things at the end of the day tend to affect, I don't want to say that they affect the poor more, but given how infrastructure is set up and everything, they end up affecting the poor more, whereas they do affect all of us and cause an inconvenience in all our lives. Yeah.
No, definitely something very worrying, and I think it's going to be a lot more difficult in general to deal with the load shedding. But hopefully, municipal governments can do their part where they are able to fix some of these problems. And I mean, I'm not particularly hopeful for Johannesburg anytime soon, but maybe some of the coalition-run cities can get their acts together and fix some of those leaks so that we don't all run out of water. Wouldn't that be nice? Anyway, let's move on to our next story. And this is a report by the Health Ombudsman, Mr. Makgopa, who says that health services are deteriorating across the country and compliance is not keeping up with checks. According to him, the public health sector is in a very bad state, and the work to raise standards is progressing so slowly that most facilities won't make the grade to provide services under the National Health Insurance scheme that government is still considering. This was a warning that he gave to Parliament on Wednesday. He said, quote, "As things stand today, we couldn't go into the NHI with the level of inspections and certification we have done so far, because I suspect most of the hospitals will not meet the high standard required for the NHI," he told the Portfolio Committee on Health. He says, "Whilst we are preparing for the NHI, we don't seem to be raising the standards of service we are giving to the population of SA. The only province that seems to have its act together is the Western Cape. The other provinces are really in difficulties and need to jack up their work." So, Chris, my question to you is, considering, I mean, this is a pretty damning report to come out of essentially I believe is, a government official as to the state of the healthcare system. If we can't meet the compliance standards for the National Health Insurance, do you think that that means that it will be killed as a policy? What do you make of all this?
Absolutely not. I think that might be more enticing in that way. I mean, not to question the methodology, but maybe some of the underlying assumptions. I would argue that the NHI inevitably is going to mean a lowering of service delivery across the board and lower quality healthcare. So maybe in that regard, you should be advocating for the NHI if you want to bring everything down to the same low equal level. So it's not like the NHI is going to mean public facilities are capacitated better and upsealed and that kind of thing. It's going to bring it all down. I don't think this report,
but that's sort of been the argument, right? Is that all this money will help to improve the system, and that only the correctly capacitated public hospitals will take part.
Yes, yeah, because monopolizing the management of any service in the hands of a state, an incapable state at that, is going to mean that you're going to improve service delivery. So you can throw all the money at it. You can have these compacts and these plans and all this sort of thing. But if you look at concrete examples on the ground of public healthcare facilities, they're not delivering nearly to where they should be, especially for the money that is being spent. There's an argument that in favor of the NHI, that more money is spent on the private sector versus the public sector, all this sort of stuff. When you compare South Africa to emerging market peers and to other relatively more developed economies, we spend more on healthcare across the board, but we don't deliver the outcomes in terms of quality healthcare for the majority of South Africans. And there's no reason to believe that giving bureaucrats more control and more money will solve any of these problems. So a useful report, I think, for pointing out some of the flaws with the current public healthcare system in the country and why the NHI won't be a panacea for these issues. You've got to get the basics right of infrastructure, of skills development, of technology sort of incubation, of getting the necessary amount of medical equipment in the country and making sure you've got the sources for that ready. Those basics. None of that is solved by giving Pretoria, Bloemfontein or Cape Town power over everyone's healthcare.
I think a particularly embarrassing part of this whole report is that he gave good marks to the Western Cape Health Department, which I think will have annoyed. I don't know what I didn't see the footage of what the MPs in the committee, how they reacted to said news, but I'm sure the ANC MPs were very upset to hear this news. Whenever a government department in particular gives the Western Cape high marks, they tend to get very upset. Tiego, what's your take on this in general?
Well, my take in general would be that there are already private doctors, as an example, who have stopped accepting the GEMS medical aid, which is a medical aid that belongs to government, because GEMS doesn't pay them on time, right? They are meant to pay them within 30 days after one has consulted and stuff of that nature, but it could go as long as 2 years before a doctor has paid their money. Now, imagine now centralizing the whole thing, whereas they are failing at just merely paying as a medical aid, now entrusting the whole government with the whole system at that level, centralizing health at that level. I think it's nonsense. I think it's not going to work out. I think the ombudsman, I'm quite glad that the ombudsman was honest enough to say that they don't think that at this point in time, this thing can be achieved. But another reality of this is that centralization of any sector is always terrible. It's a terrible idea because such a system depends on who is at the helm of who's leading the ship at that point in time. So, for example, say at the health department, this one time you do this and all things are going well. You have someone who's at the helm of health, Minister of Health, the department running very well for the next 5 years. After 5 years, you have a Jacob Zuma, someone who's clueless, doesn't know anything. The rest of the country must suffer as a consequence of who's at the helm of the department at that point in time. So anything that seeks to centralize power, give more power to government, give more power to politicians, for me, it's simply a no-go area. I'd rather we have a system such as this one, private system like this. We consult where we consult. If a doctor fails or someone at a hospital fails somewhere, that hospital is the one failing and not everything else. This thing of one person being in charge and collapsing everything and everyone in the country must now bear the brunt of those consequences, it's nonsensical. We need to decentralize. The idea of centralizing it's simply just nonsensical and something that should be left in the past.
Right, and the very obvious politicization of positions in the public health sector has also been a major problem. And I once again will draw your attention to the CEO of Tembisa Hospital, who, despite having all of these, at least mostly credible allegations of corruption and various misspending of monies and all sorts of things, like such as the purchasing of thousands of pairs of skinny jeans for a hospital, it took her ages to be suspended, presumably because she has some kind of political connection. And who knows if that story is ever going to reach its end, where someone is actually going to be properly investigated and maybe charged. So yeah, the sooner we get this stuff out of the hands of the politician, the better. Sometimes I hear sort of well-meaning socialists say things like, well, you know, the socialism would have worked, but corruption took over and ruined it. But this is, I think, a thing that's not often understood, is when you centralize power, as Tiego says, when you have government directing things, when you have a single central point of failure, that is exactly the best place for corruption to seep in. It turbocharges opportunities for corruption. Corruption is not a bug of socialism, it's a feature. Chris, any final thoughts?
No, I couldn't agree more. You incentivize the probability that corruption will happen in big or small ways. If you have the NHI fund being managed by a board of 3 individuals with the minister, for example, then you just concentrate the possibility much more that that sort of thing will happen. And again, none of this actually improves service delivery for indigent South Africans who need access to quality care. Take something like the health market inquiry, implement those reforms in the private sector, have vouchers, have some sort of competition, more robust competition in terms of medical aids, because there's interesting things going on with medical aids in the background that needs to be brought to light. Solve it better with more information and transparency versus putting it all on whichever person happens to be in charge of the whole of the country's entire healthcare system at a given point in time.
All right, let's move on to our next story. Very briefly, I don't think we're going to cover this one too much. The EFF has said that it's planning now to try and remove the Tshwane Speaker of Council, who is a member of COPE. But this member of COPE, unlike the Joburg member of COPE, is still part of the anti-ANC coalition there. And I wonder if they're talking so boldly about trying to remove the speaker, whether they think that they can swing some of the coalition partners to vote with them and the ANC to get rid of that speaker. Anyway, we'll keep an eye on that. Another thing that we'll cover is that there were a couple of by-elections yesterday. There was one in Cedarburg where a DA councillor defected to the ANC coalition there and provided the one vote that they needed to take control of the municipality, along with the PA. The DA is in alliance with a local party called Cedarburg First or Cedarburg Eerste. They just held that the DA then kicked that councillor out of the party. It went to a by-election where that councillor, who is now the mayor, stood for re-election and was defeated by the DA, who kept control of the ward and maintained their majority, along with Cedarburg First in Cedarburg municipality. So I'm sure they will once again retake it quite soon. A bit of a defeat for the PA, who, although they grew their vote in this, they weren't able to unify with the ANC, and they weren't able to defeat the DA in the ward as well. So bad result for the PA. And then another bad result for the ANC, where in KZN, in an area around between Port Shepstone and Kokstad, there was a by-election where the IFP shot up from getting 6% of the vote, I think it was, or some very small percentage of the vote, all the way up to 50%, winning the ward from the ANC. It's a new ward, but it's an area that the ANC is traditionally dominated in. So another terrible KZN result for the ANC. There was another one, I think, last month or earlier this month with a very similar story behind it. Tiego, what do you make of this? Do you think we can draw any conclusions about the way that the political flow is going?
Well, I'm not an expert at this. I must mention it first. But I think, when it comes to local government elections, a lot of things are to be considered. Sometimes people vote at local government level, vote based on the individual who's contesting, vote based on how they know them and stuff of that nature, not necessarily around the parties and stuff. So I don't think we can necessarily make a link. We can necessarily link this to national elections and how they would go, for example, in 2024. I think it does give us a bit of an idea that we might have the ANC dropping as it's dropping in these elections, but it could very well be a question of who did they put up in some of the areas where they lost votes, the DA where they gained some votes, who did they put up, the PA where they did not do quite well or where they did quite well, who did they put up. I think at local government level, a lot of times elections, party politics matter, but the individual matters more. I think it wouldn't necessarily give us the 2024 picture, but it's something perhaps that can be worked with.
I think that's a really good point, though, about how in a lot of places, and obviously, because of our system at national level being mostly proportional, it's not quite as important. But I think it is becoming increasingly important, the quality of politicians that you put up. You can't just put any old idiot up who can wave the flag and be voted. There's more pressure on politicians and legislatures and stuff now to perform well. Chris, your thoughts on these results?
Just not to sleep on the IFP. I think many analysts and commentators forget maybe the work that the IFP is doing on the ground. Many focus just on Buthelezi and maybe not on other factors of the party and the facets thereof, especially in KZN. So I think it's interesting how they're performing against the ANC especially. And I mean, we talk a lot about wild dogs taking down the ANC buffalo, but maybe we don't talk about one with some institutional memory and knowledge and know-how and sort of wiliness kind of thing.
All right, let's move on to our next story. And this is a follow-up from that murder of a German tourist that happened on the way to, it was in Mpumalanga, it was on the way to KZN, close to the Nambi Gate of sorry, not KZN, Kruger National Park. The Nambi Gate of the Kruger National Park, that tourist is on the way there, and he got shot in his car and died, a 67-year-old guy. And this, of course, has provoked an enormous amount of running about from government, who are afraid that this story will really badly hurt our tourism industry. And that's a very justified fear, because even relatively isolated murder incidents can give your country an extremely bad name when it comes to tourism. And there's talk now of closing that gate to Kruger National Park to try and prevent more attacks in the area. However, the Minister of Tourism, Lindiwe Sisulu, has come up with, I mean, I don't know how to describe it, not a great solution, and certainly not good enough by itself. Maybe it'll help a little bit, that visitors to South Africa will, at airports, be played videos giving them tips on how to stay safe while traveling the country. Chris, what do you make of this?
I mean, not even outsourcing, sort of trying to solve the problem, but the very least imaginative, least way of taking responsibility for your government's incompetence and how that's created an environment of high crime and high violence. And again, how it takes this sort of issue, which shouldn't happen in the first place, but the murder of a foreigner, to expose just what happens on a daily basis and what millions of South Africans have to deal with, because the police, they can't be trusted or called upon to protect people's lives and property. I don't know why it needs to take this sort of issue, but again, points to the disconnect between government and the people on the ground. We had this issue now with ministers not having to pay for water and electricity, and some analysts say it's tone deaf and that sort of thing. They don't care. Like, it's not a tone thing for them. They're, kings and queens. Why would kings and queens care about the lives of the plebs, sort of thing? So yeah, I think it's indicative of the attitude of government trying to now do this sort of marketing foofy. It really is very low effort to me.
And Tiego, just on that point of the police having problems, this is a story we're not going to fully go into today, but there's been a report to Parliament by SAPS and Bheki about the current state of SAPS, which shows all sorts of massive problems. The detective department only achieved 51% of its set goals. There was a 352% increase in irregular spending in the cops, and only 8.7% of DNA exhibits were properly processed by the laboratories, which suggests, we have a very, very big problem in the police. But I'm sure we all know that. And that's really what you need to be doing in order to make sure that no more tourists are killed and our industries don't suffer.
No, absolutely. But like we've discussed before, these people don't know what they're doing. They are in it for the vibes. It's really just fun and all of that for them. They might as well wake up tomorrow telling us that there's gonna be they're gonna add to the curriculum a course on how we should stay safe, how you must not get stabbed, how you must not have your phone taken away from you, and stuff of that nature. They have no ideas whatsoever. But the solution to this, I think, is really bringing in, come 2024, we as South African citizens must take it upon ourselves we must love this country enough, man. We must love this country enough. We must love it hard enough and want to see it become better. We must love our state. We must love our government. We must want to see all these sectors becoming better and elect people who can be trusted, people who know what they are doing, people who get into government and know exactly what to do, how to do it, without cheating the people, without coming up with such ridiculous ideas. I mean, this is completely ridiculous. One cannot. I'll leave it at that. This is quite ridiculous. It's disappointing. I hope that South Africans will do better when 2024 comes around.
Yeah, no, I share your exasperation. I do this show almost every day now, and there's this kind of maddening aspect to so much of the news in South Africa, where we're just stuck with the same problems over and over and over again. We don't even begin to move forward in the right direction. We're going round and round the merry-go-round, and just sort of fiddling while Rome burns. Sorry, I'm using way too many metaphors here. It is absolutely infuriating, but I really like your call there. It is, I think, up to citizens to kind of stand up and get involved and do what they can, because cynicism helps no one, and a overly cynical approach will do nothing but ensure the implosion of South Africa going forward. That doesn't mean that you have to happy clap and talk up the government and talk about how Ramaphoria and reform is actually coming down the pike. It means that you need to get justifiably angry about the problems in your community, but also believe that they can be fixed and that they will be fixed if you all put the right kind of pressure. Chris, final thoughts?
Yeah, don't expect the change from the top. Even putting your hopes on 2024. Make sure that your business and your community, that you implement some of these things around water safety, some of these solutions long before that, because coalitions doesn't mean things get solved necessarily. That just means possibly a risk of even more instability. So don't put all your money on the 2024 best case scenario solving all your problems.
Indeed. All right, that's all that we have time for today. So thank you very much for watching, and we will be back next week with the Daily Friend Show. We hope that you found it interesting, and we will see you then. Cheers, everyone, and have a wonderful and cool weekend.